Fantastic. As I mentioned before, my name is Cassia Hare. I'm with the Department of Education, our Counsellor for Education and Research based in Brazil, looking after both Brazil and Argentina. We're really excited to have you all here this morning for you, tonight for myself, so if I say that, I apologise, to talk to you about this project we're running. So the project is part of the Department International Education Innovation Fund, and it's to look at developing transnational education opportunities in Latin America, focusing on mining skills as a base, because we thought this was a really good area that we share a lot in common. Australia is a real leader in this space, and we know that there's a real gap over here in terms of skills needs. The objective of the project is really to develop and then deliver some vet pilot projects in the region, and we'll go into it a bit more in a minute. Before we kick off properly, we have a welcome from Sophie Fisher, the Acting Branch Manager of the Partnerships Development Branch in the International Division at Department of Education. Sophie.
Thanks, Cass. And just to start by saying thank you for everyone joining today's session. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I am at the moment, Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who are with us. This land was never surrendered. It always was and will continue to be Indigenous land. So thank you everyone for being here. It's a really exciting opportunity to tell you a bit about a project that we have underway and to highlight some opportunities for the vet sector in Latin America. So this project is funded, as Cass said, through the Department of Education's International Education Innovation Fund, which supports innovation, diversification and growth in the international education sector. As Cassia mentioned, the aim of the project is to pilot short training courses based on occupational standards for in-demand mining jobs in Latin America. And the project delivers on government priorities to really grow Australia's high-quality delivery of transnational education, and for education providers to work closely with industry stakeholders to meet genuine workforce and skills needs. The project also demonstrates the value that the government places on education engagement in Latin America as an important source market for students, for research collaboration and innovative delivery of education. So we look forward to your continued engagement in the project, and I'd now like to hand over to Claire Bouchard from the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, who will speak a bit to the government's broader skills agenda. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Sophie. And I apologise for any background noise. I'm working from home today, and unfortunately, it's coinciding with someone getting a tree chopped down next door. So I'll try and keep it relatively quick then. I am speaking on behalf of my Assistant Secretary, Dan Langer, who's unfortunately unwell. Now, noting that I've been requested to talk about the broader skills agenda, it would not be possible for me to do that justice in 10 minutes. So what I've decided to do is to just cover off what my broader work area is working on, and then reference a few other key priorities. So our branch is responsible for international VET, which among other things includes the development and implementation of international skills partnerships. We also provide policy input and advice on the skills aspects of international programs and projects. So this critical mining skills project is a very good example of the type of work we do. The branch is also responsible for the policy legislation and establishment of Jobs and Skills Australia, including last year's Jobs Summit, and working with Treasury on the Employment White Paper. And as this paper was only released just this week, and you may not have had a chance to read it in detail, I thought I'd just focus on that for a little bit, in particular the implications for Australian system, and then I'll try and loop that back to our mining project. So the white paper highlights the importance of an adaptable VET system that responds to emerging skills needs, and ensuring that the VET higher ed and migration systems are working together to tackle skills challenges in a coordinated way. It also is ensuring the critical role of Jobs and Skills in Australia in providing labour market forecasting to support education and training policy for the future. The importance of foundation skills, high quality careers advice, and breaking down barriers to lifelong learning. it also supports a key role that Australia's training system plays in supporting labour market outcomes for priority cohorts, such as First Nations people. To support the release of the white paper, the government has announced 3 areas for future collaboration in education, which you've probably heard in the press. The first is turbocharging TAFE centres of excellence and advancing higher apprenticeships. So the government has announced additional investment to support skills development in the key priority areas of supporting net zero transition, essential care and support services, and building Australia's digital skills capability. There'll be funding of 41.2 million over the next 5 years to support the capacity of up to 6 TAFE centres of excellence and support the development of higher apprenticeship pathways. And about 31 million of this will be available to states and territories to boost the capacity of the centres of excellence to be established on a national skills agreement. It's hoped this will rapidly build the partnerships with employers, unions, universities, and others that will be required to lay the groundwork for increased take-up of higher apprenticeships. In addition to the funding for the Centres of Excellence, the government's also committed to the foundational work required to introduce a new advanced technical qualification type equivalent to a degree but delivered by TAFEs. And you no doubt would have heard about the skills passport. So the white paper announced scoping work on that, including what the outcomes and benefits of passport could look like. This work will be undertaken in consultation with students, industry unions, tertiary institutions, and across governments. The passport responds to calls from stakeholders for the creation of a tool to help Australians demonstrate their qualifications to prospective employers, including both qualifications across VET and higher ed. And the government has committed to consulting widely in scoping the passport to better understand the needs and demands on different parties. So about 7.5 million has been committed to support a business case and consultation to inform this work. And the government's also commissioned or will commission a scoping study into financial support for placements of students into care and teaching professions, because the white paper highlighted the need to grow and strengthen the care and support economy. And as you're probably aware, Australia is experiencing persistent workforce shortages in areas such as teaching, early childhood, healthcare, and nursing. So a lot of these people, when they study these areas, they forego work to do the work placement, and they also bear upfront costs such as transport, accommodation, and materials and childcare, which can create a lot of financial hardship. So the scoping study will hopefully identify options to provide financial support for these work placements. And now briefly, I just wanted to provide a quick update on the National Skills Reform Agreement, because I did mention it in those key skills and training related findings from the white paper. And you're probably aware that the department has been negotiating the skills agreement with the states and territories for some time. I understand it's very much at the very pointy end now, and it looks to be on track to commence next year. And I understand that it's very much outcomes focused. So I just wanted to make some concluding remarks. So obviously I've only been able to cover off on a few of the government's priorities to ensure the skills sector is creating a more productive economy, helping Australians get a well-paid job and boosting living standards. As you know, there's a lot more work underway, including the new Jobs and Skills Councils getting up and running, qualifications reform, and the new Energy Apprenticeships Initiative. Of all these things is what helps make Australia's VET system world-class, and other countries look to us for assistance in building the capacity of their VET systems. And the LATAM mining project is an excellent example of this. And so I think this provides a nice segue to Tim's preso, and I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. I'm happy to pick up from there. And I just actually want to start by, first of all, acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm coming to you from today, which is on the northern banks of the Brisbane River, so the Jagera and Turrbal people, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. Claire's last comments there about having a world-class system is something that when we're in the Australian vet system, I think we can sometimes forget. You know, in a domestic context, if you were to look at reports in the newspapers and other things, sometimes we can think that that there are a range of problems, but actually we have a very, very good system, and a system that when you look at what's in the white paper, when you look at the work that the Jobs and Skills Councils are starting to do in their early stages, we're really working at the higher end of issues. And so the reason I start there is because when we look at other countries, they are very interested in what is happening in Australia in our industry sectors and in our vet sector in order to learn lessons. And we also are not so sort of focused that we don't recognise that there are probably things that we can learn from other systems as well. And so this project here definitely has a lot of those elements in it. And we had the privilege of writing a skills needs analysis report and working towards occupational standards that was able to look in depth at 6 Latin American countries, some of their skills challenges, and potentially ways that Australia could collaborate, share some of our positive lessons, but also come up with better outcomes for both our country and those countries in Latin America. So the first phase of the project was a skills needs analysis report, not dissimilar to the way that the Australian system operates. It is absolutely critical that before we go into pilots and new forms of qualifications and focusing on different industries and occupations, that we actually get the information from the ground and various data sources in order to make sure that we're targeting those initiatives in the right way. In this particular case, we did a range of desktop analysis into the workforce. As again is the case in Australia, we want people to have the right skills in the right place at the right time. And so it is very important to look at where the current workforce sits in terms of its skills and qualification base. It's important to look at what areas industry feels are important and growing, because that sort of helps you determine what future skill shortages might be. And it is also important to understand what the training system looks like in a given country, because that is the mechanism by which individuals will be upskilled in order to meet the challenges that you've just identified. And so all of those things were looked at as part of this skills needs analysis report. But we can sit in a darkened room and we can do that, and we can look at desktop analysis, but that needs to be validated on the ground as well. And as part of this program, as part of this report, we also spoke with Latin American stakeholders, both from government and industry, as well as doing sort of more broad-based consultation as well in order to validate some of those findings. And so what we came up with was a report that then gave us a clearer idea of where the next phase of the project should go. And I'll briefly talk about the occupational standards, and then Cassia will talk about phase 2 of the project. The whole point of that report was to sort of have a single sort of data set and analysis that then led into the occupational standards. The decision to design occupational standards, which is just getting underway at the moment, and this consultation is part of that next phase, is very much aligned to what we saw in the Latin American countries in terms of the types of instruments that they use in order to define their standards for their occupations. Now, the reason I sort of say it that way is because in Australia, Australian RTOs would be familiar with a highly calibrated system of units of competency, skill sets and qualifications. Occupational standards are a relatively new concept in Australia and was something that was ventilated through the public consultations around qualification reform, but they are common instruments in other countries as well. So they're not completely new. They won't look completely different, I don't imagine, from what we have in the Australian system, but it's striking that right balance between what is familiar to the Latin American countries, but also providing any Australian RTOs who may operate with flexibility as well, rather than necessarily having the type of system we have here in Australia, which is prescriptive and heavily regulated. We might move on to the next slide, and this goes into a bit more detail on the types of things that we looked at in terms of developing the report. Obviously, national and international reports, policy documents, training curriculum, the whole box and dice in terms of understanding not only what is occurring in Latin American countries, but also looking at international exemplars, including in Australia, for how there might be differences, why those differences might be there, and whether or not there can be anything that can be learnt in order to be part of a future pilot. In terms of the sort of economic or the sort of data analysis, in terms of understanding the jobs and skills landscape, using the LinkedIn, Seek, Indeed, Glassdoor, all of those types of platforms which provide information to give hopefully something close to what you would expect to see in the jobs landscape in these countries. Now, obviously, you can't get down. We can't even in Australia, as I'm sure that Jobs and Skills Australia and previously the National Skills Commission would attest to. You can only get so close to those numbers, but you can certainly get a very good sense of the general trends to enable you to identify where there might be areas of concern or focus that are required in terms of where there are current skill shortages and where there are emerging skills needs for which the pipeline of skills is simply not there, and therefore there may be emerging skill shortages. As with all of these things, we needed some sort of architecture to pin all of this to. If we were to rely on LinkedIn and Seek and others for job role names and job titles, we would potentially run into a cul-de-sac, because oftentimes within the same organisation, the same job is referred to in different ways. So we went to our old friend ANSCO, which again, in an international sense, is a very useful framework by which to sort of sort the job roles and titles and then dive down further into skills. The ANSCO framework, as we all know, is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. However, it is a very, very good base of which to understand how you can compare like job roles to each other. And when you're doing a comparative analysis across different countries, that is absolutely critical. As I alluded to before, in terms of who the consultations were with, we obviously have our education counsellors, Australian Councillors for Education, of which Cassia is one, in Latin America, and that is extremely useful in terms of understanding who we should talk to, and obviously getting the opportunity to talk to those people as well. We spoke with industry, we spoke with government as well, and then, as I said, they were in the form of one-on-one consultations. We had a broader base survey as well to gather more information. You can appreciate that with time zone differences and language differences, this is not as straightforward as potentially doing a consultation in a domestic sense. However, I'm comfortable that this report was able to have conversations and gain information that enabled us to validate what I've just sort of outlined in that dark blue section up in the top half of that page. In terms of the report's key findings, and actually when I was sort of looking at this on the way in this morning, I think I might actually go from the bottom up. And the reason why is because I think in terms of the demand for job roles across the 6 Latin American countries, it's a similar picture to Australia. They need people to operate in a technical sense in order to execute the things that need to be done in the resources sector. If you ask an Australian mining company that at the moment, you're probably going to get a similar answer. So mobile plant operators, fixed plant operators, engineers, electricians, like these are the roles which are absolutely in critical demand, across all of the Latin American countries, and it's probably no different in the global resources sector either. There are also those other roles which sort of sit around mining operations, like community engagement, that are also, and business and management skills and digital skills. All of those underpinning transferable skills were also prevalent in the analysis that we did as part of this report. And in some of the more advanced resources sectors, there was also this sort of push towards automation. And so the Industry 4.0 skills and the automation of different pieces of plant and equipment were things that came through very strongly. Australia has only in recent years updated the resources training package to start to contemplate automation, and there's been some great work. I sort of acknowledge the future skills initiatives of people on this call in Queensland in particular that I'm familiar with, who have, are focusing on those skills. Some of those are starting to come through in Latin America as well. In terms of, then you've got those skills and you've got those job roles. What about the training system? The training systems across the Latin American countries vary in terms of their levels of maturity. However, there are some very strong architectures in place in terms of occupational standards in some countries. In other countries, the informal workforce and the informal upskilling is still prevalent as well. And so it would be remiss of me to try and sort of make blanket statements across the countries, because there is, significant variance. However, what it did show was that there are certainly elements of the Australian system which can be taken into Latin America, and hopefully those systems could learn from some of the great work that we do here in Australia as well. As I said before, similarly, in some of those countries, there's probably some lessons that we can learn back the other way. So if you've got the job roles and the focus areas for the resources sector, and you've got some idea of how we could work together in terms of the training sector in order to improve skills and get those skills into the economy. Why do we do all that? We do all that to improve labour productivity, or what we've called here labour intensity. So some of the analysis around the different economies show that there is definitely scope for improvement in terms of what we might call productivity or labour intensity, i.e. the amount of output that is generated for each unit of labour. And so, there are a range of things that sit around that. The skills of the individual are a big, but not the only thing that sits in that. But definitely the analysis showed that if we focus on the right job roles and we find the right mechanism to get those skills into the mining sector in these countries, then there is definitely space for that to help improve labour market productivity, which obviously means more successful operations, stronger economy, and hopefully a stronger society and job satisfaction as well. Which leads to, so what about the countries? And so the top two there, we found that Chile and Mexico were very much priority locations. They have a mature mining sector, and they have training systems that have very solid architecture, and architecture that sort of doesn't look dissimilar in some respects to what we have in Australia. There are political and social conditions in each of those countries on a regional basis. However, given the mining operations that are occurring in those countries, and in some cases the Australian-based companies who are operating in those countries, it really did jump out at us that Chile and Mexico were worth further consideration. Argentina and Brazil were also identified. So while those countries may not have the same level of maturity in their resources sector and training sectors as Chile and Mexico, there was a lot of opportunity in those countries. And so therefore, again, given that the exam question here was, how can the Australian system and the Australian training industry help in these countries, the report found that there was definitely opportunity in those countries as well. And so if we move on to the next slide, just because I have a theory that everyone loves flags, we thought we'd put some flags onto a 2x2. But you can see there that this is reflective of what I just outlined there. On the left-hand side, there are some of the considerations that went into the ability to partner and partner attractiveness. As I said, alignment to the education needs and the maturity of the education training system were two things that were a big tick for those countries that had those things. The reason for that is that it's obviously easier for an international RTO or Australian RTO to come in and operate in a more mature environment than sort of also have to be part of the maturing of that environment. And so they were big ticks. In terms of relationships and contacts, they were critical as well, because it's all well and good for us to have a wonderful analysis and some great skills to offer, but if people don't know that we have those on offer, then they won't hit the mark. So you can see there that partner attractiveness had a range of considerations when we were thinking of attractive, when we were considering the 6 different countries as part of the pilot. Ability to partner very much looks at not only the stability, the political, social, and economic stability of the country, but also it would not be prudent to think that an Australian RTO could just come in and deliver things in isolation. There needs to be other structures in place in country, that those things must already exist in order for a pilot to be likely of success. And so therefore, considering who those partners might be, as well as the statutory and other structures, were key considerations. And so you can see there, by no means Peru and Colombia sort of countries that we would never do something with in the future. It's just for the purposes of this report and what we could do now. The report identified this prioritisation framework, and the results are there on the page. In terms of the actual opportunities to collaborate, I've peppered some of them through my remarks already, and some of them are relevant to RTOs, and some are relevant to the broader training industry or broader government in Australia. But certainly targeted pilot training programs are something that will help lift the skills base of those already operating in the mining sector in Latin America, but also help to introduce new people into the mining sector in Latin America in order to help it grow. Again, that is a statement I could substitute Latin America and put Australia in. You know, how do you find lateral workers from other industries? How do you find new entrants to the industry, whether they be from school or from unemployed or informally employed cohorts, as well as skill migration, which I'll get to in a minute. Those upskilling initiatives may not be full qualifications. And so this is a journey that the Australian training system is going on now as well. It may be a full qualification, but it may also be part of a qualification. It may also be industry-based upskilling. The reason for the occupational standard is to identify the parts of a job role, which then RTOs in partnership with industry can determine, you know, exactly what sort of form or what container size of qualification or credential is required. So I think that is something that, given that the Australian training system is definitely looking at that at the moment and has been on that journey for a few years now, that is something that is definitely an opportunity for collaboration. Improved industry engagement, I think, is something that would be a high priority as well. And again, something that the Australian general training landscape and resources sector can lean into. Skills recognition is a big one. And the reason why is because I think one of the potential benefits of this collaboration is that we do have Australian organisations who are operating mining operations in Latin America. And the Australian mining sector also is in perpetual skill shortage, it would seem. And so the movement of people across those jurisdictions with recognised skills without having to upskill at either end would be something that would be beneficial. There is some of that occurring at the moment, but improvements in that area would improve labour mobility, and therefore you would think would improve the strength of both sectors, both here and in Latin America. Talent attraction, I've referred to, you know, getting more people, new entrants or lateral entrants into the mining sector in order to fill skill shortages. And data collection as well. I think collaborating between industry training providers and different governments and systems would be something that would help improve not only the sort of picture of skill shortages and training outcomes in Latin America, but also would help with the data gathering exercise in Australia as well. There's certainly things that I think each jurisdiction can learn from each other in that regard. So with that, I'm not sure where I am in respect to my allotted time, but that is sort of a summary of the months of work that went into the Skills Insights report. The next phase for us is the development of occupational standards, and it's probably a segue to you, Cassia, to talk about phase 2.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Tim. I'm going to try and share my screen, but okay, looks like it's working. Here we are. Great. So I introduced myself before. I'm part of a team for the Department of Education in Latin America. So my colleague and I, Barbara Klompenhauer, who's based in Mexico, she looks after Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru. And I look after Brazil and Argentina. And our role over here is to support education within the region. So it's a really big region for our education market, and we're looking for opportunities for partnerships, collaboration, transnational education, which is really where this presentation comes in. So I'm going to take us briefly through our objectives, outcomes, the scope of the activities in phase 2, and what pilots could look like. Tim also mentioned the reports, and we hope that those reports that Sign have done can be really helpful outside of the scope of the actual pilots. So we're happy to share those with you. And if you're looking for opportunities within the region, they're a resource you can use to try and think about where there might be those opportunities. So the objective of this project is to create new opportunities for transnational education delivery in VET. And this second phase of the project is around delivery of piloting mining skills, VET courses in Argentina, Chile, and Mexico. So it's really limited to those 3 countries. So what we're really trying to do here is not just pilot T&E, but see if we can make it commercially viable. This region we've heard, and the reason we're doing the project here is that there are gaps. There are real gaps in the skills offering in the mining sector. And so we're looking for some sort of creative approaches to how we can make these commercially viable in an environment that is price sensitive. We have, for example, Argentina, education is free. But there is so much mining activity going on there that people are really crying out for things. I went down there earlier this year and I took a copy of the training package for mining, and I had people looking through it and they're saying, not only do we have skills gaps here, we don't even have the people to train for these gaps. So there is such a big vacuum. We also are looking at broader government objectives around skilled migration and mobility. We want to take our stakeholders on a journey as part of this project to really promote our VET system, to help them understand the quality of our VET system, the quality of our providers, why we do things the way we do it, which will, again, hopefully help not only with the T&E aspect, but also with things like skilled migration, mobility, recognition of Australian qualifications, and really position us as a partner of choice. And we know that where we can influence the government's way of thinking in our partner countries, it does make it easier for Australian providers to come in, get contracts, align the products that they're delivering with local systems as well. We really put mining because it's an area that there is strong alignment between Australia and Latin America on, and there are those gaps. We have that expertise that we can really offer there. And so far, it's been an incredibly well-received project by both industry and government in our partner countries. There are some challenges. One of the challenges is that in a lot of the countries, there is no separate university and VET sector. So to explain to people, oh no, we're not bringing universities into do a pilot, we're bringing in these other training providers, has been an interesting conversation. Some countries are more advanced. So Chile's system is already quite close to Australia's system. Mexico and Chile have participated in another occupational standards project through APEC, so they understand it a bit more. And as I mentioned, the price sensitivity is a big one. So in terms of the scope of activities, where we're moving to now that we've got the report is we're working to establish project advisory committees in each of our 3 countries. And that's going to include government, industry, and the training sector. We're bringing people from both the education ministries and the mining ministries on board to really help us. And part of that will be, really understanding the Australian system as well as being able to give us advice. So give us advice about, we've got the reports, but where should we be focusing? The feedback on the occupational standards. How can we develop pilots? Where should we be delivering the pilots, etc. Then we're going to, as Tim took us through, develop the occupational standards for the in-demand roles, and then move that on to developing curriculum and delivering pilot mining courses in Spanish in our partner countries. Not all of the occupational standards that we develop as part of this process are going to end up being delivered through the pilot programs. There is a limited budget, there is a limited scope, but the more of the occupational standards we can develop, the better, because hopefully that provides a basis for future opportunities within these countries. The pilots will be delivered through employers. So the idea is to really target existing employees rather than sort of starting from scratch. And we think that's a good way to go for a pilot program as well. And particularly because these are the future potential clients that are actually going to be able to pay for courses in the future. We don't expect, 19-year-old students to be able to go and buy an international course. Some can, but not on large scale. Our rough timelines are that we're doing the occupational standards now with SIGN. We want to start developing the curriculum and working with the PACs in that sense from early next year, with the idea to start the pilots rolling out, hopefully at the latest by July next year. So start getting those out. In terms of what the pilots could look like, there's really no standard here. We're really open to different models. It is a pilot. There is no need for uniformity. The conditions are different in each of the countries, and our project advisory committees are going to have a say, will give us advice as well in what those look like, and really understand what the market is and what the demand is. We expect that there will be non-accredited courses unless there is some miracle where the partner governments come in and say, yes, we're adding this to our list and going to accredit it. And so, as I mentioned, it should be a flexible design. So the mode of delivery, it could be hybrid, it could be purely online, it could be in partnership with the local training provider. There are obviously challenges with in-person training, not just around cost, but also remoteness. In Argentina, altitude is a huge issue. In some parts of Latin America, safety is an issue as well. So there, we'll have to work very closely with our partner countries to work out how is it practical to deliver these courses, and that will feed into things like what type of course is it? Is it a micro credential that's delivered in 5 hours? Is it, something closer to a sort of certificate 2 or certificate 3 in the Australian system that has real practical elements, and how will we deliver those practical elements? And so those things they're going to be tricky, and they're going to take a lot of work through, and a lot of advice from our partners. The courses will have to be in Spanish. We do not expect any or many of the people taking these courses to be speaking English at a fluent level. It's going to be remote people. A lot of cases, the people we'll be targeting won't have had a lot of formal education. So there might be digital literacy challenges. There might be issues with access to internet and technology as well that we're going to have to overcome here. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we really want successful models and pilots here that go to something sustainable and commercial. And, if that involves looking at partnerships with local training providers who can deliver practical elements or provide facilities to do the practical elements, that's an option. Whether we're looking at coupling things with train the trainer courses as well to make it better value for mining companies, that's an option as well. So there's different ways, we can really come at this, and we're really keen to reach out to the Australian training providers to hear ideas about how we can do this. In terms of the stakeholders involved, there's the Australian government, which is Barbara and I at Post, and Tiago from my team who's online. We have Department of Education, Sophie and the team back in Canberra, as well as the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations with Claire and her team. We'll have the project advisory committees in country. We'll have the employers and the employees who are actually receiving the training, SIGN, who's doing our occupational standards, as well as the training providers. So that's my snapshot. My email address and Barbara's email address are on the slide, but I really wanted to just open up now and have a bit of a conversation. And if people have, questions about, well, how would it actually work? How would this, how would it come together, etc. We'll open the floor for that. Questions, comments, major gaps in there that you see?
Firstly, thank you. That was really great to go through that detailed analysis, and it seems like a lot of work was done in phase 1. So yeah, huge thank you to the team that pulled that together. I guess for me, it's more of a where to from here, kind of what are the next steps to get involved. it seems like quite an exciting program, and I'm quite sure that there's a lot of way that a number of RTOs can get involved in this, but finding those partners and putting those proposals together is probably the question mark for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will go out to market, to tender, to put ideas in. Obviously, it's a bit tricky because, we're not saying, we're going to tender for a pilot to deliver, 5 micro-credentials on this topic in a country. We're going to go out to a broad-based pilot, and we are open to having, more than one training provider involved. There's 3 countries, so there's opportunity there as well. So stay tuned for a tender.
That sounds exciting. And I'm assuming as well, IP will be something that you'd probably want to be owned by the project. I'm conscious that a number of us have existing materials that would be great to adapt, but we can't necessarily release the IP from the existing materials. So,
of course. Yeah, look, it's a good question, and it's one that's on our radar that we haven't really resolved yet. So I guess that's good feedback as well, to hear that, if it's based on existing products, that would cause difficulty in terms of releasing IP. And so I think for the occupational standards, it's a bit easier for us because we're commissioning them, and we're going to be working in partnership on them. So I think we're open to a conversation about IP, but it's not something we've resolved as to, where it will fit and sit.
thank you.
Thanks, Cassie. There's also...
Yes,
yeah,
please, Tim,
sorry. Yeah, I thought I'm probably the best place to answer that question. So thanks, Charmaine. In terms of, so there was a lot, and when the report gets released, it's a fairly comprehensive report, so you can sort of see and add to these comments. But certainly I think there's a few areas. One is, the use of occupational standards in particularly in Mexico, and is probably something that we could learn from. We're only sort of just starting to get there we have a highly prescriptive and regulated system. An occupational standard has a lot more flexibility in order to deliver. And I think one of the things, just picking up on Cassie's comments, that RTOs involved in this pilot will have to do is almost sort of shed their Australian DNA as part of the highly compliance-based system and sort of embrace the greater flexibility that will be on offer in Latin America. Now, that comes with pros and cons. But I definitely think that something in the sub-qualification, more flexible space is something that some of the countries here do reasonably well. I'm not for a moment arguing that we should water down regulation in Australia, just if this is being recorded. But I think there's probably more tools in the armoury that we could use. The other big thing, and it's probably less about improving the Australian skills system, but rather improving the skills that we have in Australia, and that is that recognition. We have, you will all be familiar with sort of the usual refrain from the Australian mining sector. There are resources in Australia, and we have, we're very lucky to have those resources. However, Australian mining companies, in order to ensure their longevity, will have to continue to look overseas into more difficult physical terrain, but also more difficult political climates in order to, and just the difficulty of operating overseas, in order to continue their operations. That lends itself to the fact that we need some sort of labour mobility in order to help flatten out the peaks and troughs of the labour market and commodity prices and all of those kind of things. So I think on that last slide, my favourite points, if I have some, Cassia, are the first one around, just seeing what you as a training industry can come up with in terms of innovative approaches, because I think some of the approaches that we use in this pilot will hopefully be able to be used and highlighted to Australian, particularly state governments here in Australia. And then secondly, that idea of how can we recognise credentials across the Pacific, I think would be something that would be really good to come out of this.
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. And that really goes to Charmaine's comment there around that. And there's a history as well in international projects in this space, sort of going 2 ways. So we've seen projects before that have happened across APEC with things like occupational standards, then influencing some considerations within the Australian government about, well, you know, do we look at this? Do we look at different options? So I think these really are two-way learnings, not just in that delivery sense, but also in the, you know, how do we create these building blocks in a way that's well recognised across regional borders as well. Steve.
Yeah, I guess my question follows on from Tim's comment, and it is around Australian companies, both mining and met sector, that are already active in Latin America. Are they involved in the consultation of this project? Because I think their staff and potential staff form part of that sustainable model, if they're willing, you know, to fund them and recognise and participate. And from earlier work I was involved in across Africa, again, a source of students is government, as you identified, Cassia, but also very broadly, Treasury, the land and water responsibility portfolios are very much lacking in knowledge of mining. So again, provide a sustainable source of students. If those government departments likewise are willing to send students and pay, it builds a sustainable model. And it's important that both industry and government talk to each other. And hence, by participating in the same short course and having that same foundation of knowledge, it just enables all of that to happen. So it's a sort of comment, but I would hope that, you know, it's some way we can tap into the Australian diaspora over there in Latin America.
Absolutely, and I'll let Tim speak in a minute about the consultation process and how involved they were. But we very much have the Australian companies on our radar. And actually, the original impetus for this project was, you know, I was talking to our embassy in Buenos Aires, and they were saying we've got Australian companies here, and they can't get the skilled workers they need for mining. So that's what we're hearing, and that's sort of how this whole thing was born. And we're like, well, that's a great project to do then, and a great area to work. In terms of that government comment, it's interesting because that's something I've heard as well when talking to governments and talking to the mining industry as well. I was part of a panel down at a mining conference in Argentina earlier this year, and they were talking about this. They're saying governments making decisions around mining, around regulation, around, you know, all of these sorts of things, and we need to make sure that the decision makers understand what's happening and understand, you know, these environmental issues and what's happening, but also the broader impact on communities and how mining can contribute to all of that.
Yeah, Steve, just with respect to the consultation, the sort of larger and more obvious mining organisations who have operations in both countries were talked to as part of the report. I think on an ongoing basis, so while they might not form part of the packs that Cassia mentioned, I certainly think, given the point you raised, given what we've said, it makes sense to do and we had a look. There are a large number of organisations that are listed on the ASX or otherwise that are operating in Latin America, and there are probably a range of others through mergers and acquisitions or other exploration that are looking to move there. So I think once this pilot gets down the track, it will be a cohort that will need to be looked at. And without putting the cart before the horse, I also think that it would potentially be an interesting area for a pilot respondent to look at as well, because, as you say, you know, if you've got operations in both countries, you're part of the same organisation. It sort of helps with the intra-organisation recognition. If you can't get that right, it's a bit of an ask to then ask the two governments to get it right, right? Like so. Yeah, so it's definitely an interesting point. And I think there's a larger number of potential people in that pool than we might think. Sorry, just one other thing to add there. The types of commodities in Latin America are also future-facing commodities, right? So mining this is a good point in time. When's the best time to plant a tree? You know, it's a good point in time to do this because, you know, as we move away from certain commodities towards other commodities, Latin America will become more and more of a focus. So, you know, large and sophisticated mining companies will be looking there as well.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Steve. Other questions, comments? No? Fantastic. So we'll make the report available. I think we're planning on emailing it out to the participants of this session very shortly afterwards, and then we are trying to get it up on a website somewhere so people can view at least the country profiles, and we'll make this recording available as well. But please keep an eye out. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself. I think you got an email from Tiago with the details for this link, who's in my team and our point person on the project in the region. So really, really happy to hear from you. And if you've got any other sort of major concerns we need to work through, like the IP issue, we're grateful to hear from those. Steve.
A very quick one. We're going into the funny season in Australia, of course, as we go into summer. The tender, when are you hoping to get that out, Cassia? And when
Sooner
might the
rather
deadline
than later, and not over Christmas. Sooner rather than later, and definitely not over Christmas. Yes, we're not going to drop something on the 20th of December. Great.
So I'm smiling because it has happened.
I know. Okay, fantastic. Thank you all so much for your time. Again, any questions, please shout out, and we hope to be in touch soon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.